The envelope sat on my kitchen counter like a ticking bomb. Dad's familiar scrawl across the front, his last message to me, delivered 5 years after his death. My hands trembled as I traced the edge of the seal. I'm Brooke, and until today, I thought I knew everything about my father's passing. Funny how life waits until you're settled into comfortable certainties before pulling the rug out. Darling, are you going to open that thing or just stare at it all day? Helen's voice sliced through my thoughts. My mother-in-law had the uncanny ability to materialize at the worst possible moments. Her perfectly manicured nails drumming against my granite countertop. It's private, I said, but she'd already positioned herself beside me, close enough that her Chanel no. 5 made my nose itch. Nothing's private in family, dear. She smiled that razor-thin smile that never quite reached her eyes. Nathan would want to know what it says. Nathan. My husband was probably still at the office, trying to prove himself worthy of taking over his father's law firm. He'd been doing that for the past 15 years. I ripped open the envelope, partly to spite Helen, partly because I couldn't stand the suspense anymore. The letter inside was short, but the bank statement that fell out made Helen gasp. $2 million. Her voice went up an octave. Your father had a secret account? My eyes scanned Dad's words, for my little girl. Use it wisely. Some battles are worth fighting. The date on the letter was 3 days before his heart attack. This could help with the firm's expansion, Helen said, her voice honey-sweet. Nathan's been so worried about the capital investment needed. I folded the letter carefully, tucking it back into the envelope. I need time to think. Think? Helen's laugh could freeze hell. Brooke, darling, you're part of the Parker family now. We support each other. Nathan needs this. Nathan needs a lot of things, I muttered, remembering our argument last night about having children. Another thing Helen had opinions about. I'll call Richard. Helen reached for her phone. We should discuss this as a family. No. The word came out sharper than I intended. This is my inheritance. My decision. Helen's face hardened. You sound just like your father. Always putting yourself first. You barely knew my father. I knew enough. She straightened her designer blazer. He never understood the importance of family loyalty. I hoped you'd be different. The front door opened, and Nathan's footsteps echoed through the house. Helen's face brightened instantly. Perfect timing, sweetheart, she called out. Your wife has some interesting news to share. Nathan appeared in the kitchen doorway, his tie loose, dark circles under his eyes. He looked at the envelope in my hands, then at his mother's triumphant expression. What's going on? Before I could speak, Helen jumped in. Brooke's father left her quite a surprise. Money that could solve all our problems. I watched my husband's face change, hope replacing exhaustion. Really? That's amazing, honey. But it wasn't amazing. It was a test, one I was already failing in Helen's eyes. As Nathan moved to hug me, I caught Helen's calculating gaze over his shoulder. She'd already decided how this would play out. Dad's words echoed in my head, some battles are worth fighting. I hugged Nathan back, but my mind was already racing. This money wasn't just an inheritance, it was ammunition. And for the first time in 15 years of marriage, I wondered if I was finally ready to go to war with Helen Parker. 3 days after the letter arrived, I sat across from Nathan at our dining table, pushing salmon around my plate while he talked about the firm's expansion plans. The excitement in his voice made my stomach twist. Mom's right, you know. This is perfect timing. He reached for my hand. We could finally make the firm what Dad always dreamed it could be. I pulled away, standing to clear my plate. What about what I dreamed it could be? What about the art gallery I wanted to open? The gallery? Nathan's fork clattered against his plate. Brooke, that was just a hobby. This is our future we're talking about. Our future or your mother's vision of it? His jaw tightened. Don't start with that again. The doorbell rang, saving us from another argument. But when I opened the door, there stood Helen and Richard, dressed for dinner. Surprise. Helen breezed past me, Richard trailing behind with an apologetic smile. I brought the paperwork to discuss the investment structure. Of course she did. I shot Nathan a look. Did you know about this? His guilty expression said everything. Helen was already spreading documents across our dining table, pushing aside our half-eaten dinner. Richard's drawn up everything. We just need your signature, dear. I haven't agreed to anything, I said, but Helen waved her hand dismissively. Nathan explained everything to us this morning. We're all so excited about this opportunity. This morning? I stared at my husband, who suddenly found his shoes fascinating. You discussed my inheritance with them without me? They're family, Brooke, Nathan said quietly. They needed to know. Know what exactly? My voice cracked. That you've already decided how to spend my father's money? Richard cleared his throat. Perhaps we should give them a moment, Helen. Nonsense. Helen's smile was steel. Brooke's just being dramatic. Nathan, explain to your wife why this is the right decision. I watched my husband straighten his shoulders, slipping into lawyer mode. The firm needs this investment to compete with larger practices. Dad's health isn't great, and when I take over. When you take over? I interrupted. Or when your mother decides you're ready. Helen's eyes narrowed. That's uncalled for. Is it? My hands were shaking. Like the time you convinced Nathan to turn down that job offer in Chicago? Or when you insisted we buy this house, 3 doors down from yours? We were helping you make the right choices, Helen said. Something your own mother never managed to teach you. The room went silent. Even Richard looked uncomfortable. My mother taught me to stand up for myself, I said, my voice steady despite the rage building inside me. Something Nathan never learned from you. Brooke. Nathan stood up, but I was already heading for the stairs. I'm going to bed. When I come down tomorrow, I expect these papers to be gone. I paused at the bottom step. And Nathan? Don't bother coming up tonight. Helen's voice followed me. You're making a mistake, dear. Family has to stick together. I stopped, turned. You're right, Helen. Family should stick together. But I'm starting to wonder which family Nathan's really part of. Later, lying alone in our bed, I heard them talking downstairs. Helen's sharp whispers, Richard's mumbled responses, and Nathan's silence. Always his silence. My phone buzzed with a text from my mother. Everything okay? You seemed off when we talked earlier. I stared at the message, remembering how Dad used to say that sometimes the bravest thing you can do is admit when you're not okay. My fingers moved across the screen. Can I come over tomorrow? We need to talk. Her response was immediate. Always, sweetheart. Always. The voices downstairs finally faded. Car doors slammed, engines started. When Nathan eventually came up, he took the guest room without a word. I touched Dad's letter on my nightstand, thinking about his words again. Some battles are worth fighting. But as I lay there in the dark, I wondered if this was still just about the money, or if it had become something bigger, a battle for Nathan's soul. And maybe my own. I hadn't meant to overhear them. I was just dropping off some files at the firm, a peace offering to Nathan after 3 days of cold silence. But Helen's voice carried through the partially open door of Richard's office, sharp and clear as breaking glass. If you can't control your wife, you'll never control this firm. Helen's words made me freeze in the hallway. The inheritance is a test, Nathan. Show me you can handle this, or everything goes to your cousin Michael. Mom, please. Nathan's voice cracked. I'm trying, but Brooke needs to learn her place. I've worked too hard building this legacy to let her destroy it with her artistic fantasies. I pressed record on my phone, hands trembling. What about what I want? Nathan asked. What you want? Helen laughed. Darling, you've never known what you want. Remember that ridiculous dream about becoming a teacher? Thank God I put a stop to that. My chest tightened. Nathan had never told me about wanting to teach. The Chicago job would have ruined everything, Helen continued. Just like that gallery would ruin everything now. Your father and I didn't sacrifice everything just to watch you throw it all away. I'm 40 years old, Mom. And still so naive. Sign those papers, Nathan. Get Brooke's signature. Or I'll make sure Michael takes your place. I backed away from the door, bumping into Richard. He steadied me, his eyes full of something like shame. How long have you known? I whispered. Brooke. How long? He looked away. Helen means well. She just wants control. The word tasted bitter. And you let her have it. Sometimes peace comes at a price. Peace. I gestured toward the office. Is that what you call this? The door opened. Helen emerged first, perfectly composed until she saw me. Something flickered across her face, fear, maybe? Then Nathan appeared, looking like a ghost of himself. Brooke? His eyes widened. What are you? Dropping off those files you needed. I held up the folder, then let it fall. Papers scattered across the floor like autumn leaves. Congratulations on the promotion, Michael. Helen stepped forward. Whatever you think you heard. I heard enough. I turned to Nathan. Did you ever wonder why your father drinks so much at family dinners? Why he can barely look you in the eye? Richard flinched. That's enough, Helen snapped. No, it's not nearly enough. I pulled out my phone, played the recording. Helen's voice filled the hallway. If you can't control your wife. Nathan's face crumpled. Brooke, I can explain. Can you? Because I've spent 15 years watching you chase your mother's approval. 15 years pretending not to notice how she manipulates everyone around her. But this? I stopped the recording. This is who you really are. You're being dramatic, Helen said, but her voice shook slightly. Am I? Tell me, Helen, does Richard know about the trust fund conditions? About how you'll cut Nathan off if he doesn't do exactly what you want? Richard's head snapped up. What conditions? For the first time, Helen looked uncertain. Richard, I'll send you the recording, I told Richard. All of it. Maybe it's time everyone heard the truth. You wouldn't dare, Helen whispered. Watch me. I turned to Nathan. I'm going to my mother's. Don't follow me. Don't call. When you're ready to be the man I married instead of the son she created, you know where to find me. I walked away, their voices fading behind me. In the parking lot, my hands shook so badly I could barely get my key in the ignition. But as I drove away, I felt something else beneath the anger and pain, a fierce, burning satisfaction. Dad's voice echoed in my head, some battles are worth fighting. This wasn't just about money anymore. This was about breaking free from Helen's web of control. And for the first time, I understood exactly what kind of battle my father had been preparing me for. My mother's kitchen hadn't changed in 20 years. The same yellow curtains, the same copper pots hanging above the stove, the same smell of coffee and cinnamon. But I had changed. 3 days at her house had shown me that. You're not eating, Mom said, pushing a plate of pancakes toward me. And those headaches are getting worse. I rubbed my temples. I'm fine. Brooke Elizabeth Sanders, you haven't been fine since you married into that family. She sat across from me, her face lined with worry. Have you listened to that recording again? 17 times. I pushed the plate away. Nathan's called twice. Texted 38 times. Helen sent flowers. Manipulation comes in many forms, sweetheart. The doorbell rang. Mom's expression hardened as she went to answer it. I heard Richard's voice in the hallway, quiet and strained. She doesn't want visitors, Mom said. Please. Richard's voice cracked. 5 minutes. I stood in the kitchen doorway. It's okay, Mom. Richard looked older than he had 3 days ago, his shoulders hunched under his expensive suit. He held out a manila envelope. What's that? I asked. Everything. He placed it on the counter. Bank statements. Trust documents. Helen's letters to the board. His hands shook. I should have done this years ago. I opened the envelope. The first document made my blood run cold, a contract dated 15 years ago, just before our wedding. She made him sign it, Richard said. If Nathan ever left the firm or went against her wishes, he'd lose everything. Not just money. His inheritance, his position, even the house. The house is in my name too. Richard wouldn't meet my eyes. Check the deed amendment from last year. I flipped through the papers until I found it. My signature was there, perfect and precise. Except I'd never signed it. She forged this. Helen's always been thorough. Richard's voice was barely a whisper. I enabled it. All of it. The controlling, the manipulation. I thought I was protecting our son, but you were protecting yourself. The pieces clicked into place. That's why you drink at family dinners. Why you never stand up to her. He nodded. I'm a coward, Brooke. But maybe you don't have to be. Mom touched my shoulder. What are you going to do? Before I could answer, my phone buzzed. Nathan's face appeared on the screen, followed by a text, "We need to talk. Please." I'm not with her. He's at the park, Richard said. The one where you had your first date. He's been there for hours. I looked at the documents, then at my phone. Why are you doing this now? Because I saw myself in Nathan's eyes that day at the office. The same defeat I've felt for 40 years. Richard straightened his tie with trembling fingers. Helen doesn't know I'm here. She doesn't know about these papers. Use them however you want. She'll destroy you. Maybe it's time someone destroyed her instead. He turned to leave, then paused. He loves you, Brooke. More than the firm, more than the money. He just doesn't know how to prove it yet. After he left, Mom wrapped her arms around me. Whatever you decide, I'm here. I stared at the papers, at Nathan's text, at my father's letter still tucked in my purse. The headache pounded harder. I need to see him, I said finally. Are you sure? No, I wasn't sure of anything anymore. Except that somewhere between Helen's manipulation and Richard's confession, this had stopped being about revenge. Now it was about survival, not just mine, but Nathan's too. I gathered the documents and my phone. I'll be back later. Brooke? Mom's voice stopped me at the door. Remember what your father always said about forgiveness? That it's not about forgetting, but about choosing your own peace. She nodded. Just make sure whatever you choose brings you peace, not more war. I stepped out into the afternoon sun, Richard's revelations heavy in my bag, Nathan's text burning in my pocket. The park was only 10 minutes away, but I knew those 10 minutes would change everything. Nathan sat on our bench by the duck pond, shoulders slumped, tie loosened. He looked like a man awaiting execution. I gripped Richard's envelope tighter, watching him from the path. I didn't think you'd come, he said without turning. I almost didn't. I remained standing, keeping distance between us. Why here? Remember that first date? You said this place felt honest. He finally looked at me. I need to be honest now. Like the honest conversation you had with your mother about my inheritance? He flinched. I deserve that. You deserve worse. I pulled out the forged deed amendment. Explain this. His face went pale as he studied the document. I didn't. I never knew about this. What else don't you know about, Nathan? What else has she done while you played the obedient son? A duck splashed nearby, the sound sharp in the heavy silence. Nathan's hands trembled as he reached for his briefcase. I found these yesterday. He handed me a stack of letters. Mom's been intercepting our mail for years. Job offers, gallery inquiries, even personal letters from your father before he died. The world tilted sideways. I recognized Dad's handwriting on several envelopes, dates from months before his death. She's been watching us, Nathan continued. Controlling everything. The house, the firm, our marriage. Stop. My voice cracked. Just stop. Brooke, please. 15 years, Nathan. 15 years of watching you choose her over me. And now you want to play victim? I was trying to protect you. From what? I threw Richard's envelope at him, papers scattering like leaves. From having my own life? My own dreams? Or from realizing that my husband is too weak to stand up to his mother? He grabbed the falling documents, freezing when he saw the trust agreement. Where did you get these? Your father. Turns out he finally found his conscience. Nathan read quickly, his face darkening. She can't do this. The firm belongs to Dad, not her. Check the last page. He flipped through, then stopped. He signed it over to her. When? 3 months after our wedding. Right after you turned down that teaching position. Nathan stood abruptly, pacing. I'll fight this. We'll get lawyers. We? I laughed bitterly. There is no we anymore, Nathan. You made sure of that when you discussed my inheritance with her before talking to me. I was scared. His voice echoed across the pond. Every decision, every choice, she always made me feel like one wrong move would destroy everything. The firm, our future, our marriage. She didn't destroy our marriage. You did. By letting her. I opened one of Dad's intercepted letters with shaking hands. The date was 2 weeks before his death. My dearest Brooke, I read aloud. I hope this reaches you in time. There are things you need to know about Helen Parker and why I'm leaving you the money. She's not who you think she is. The letter ended there, torn. I looked up at Nathan. Did you read these? He shook his head. I couldn't. I was afraid of what I'd find. My phone buzzed, a text from Mom, Helen's here. She knows about Richard's visit. Your mother's at my mom's house. I gathered the scattered papers. Time to choose, Nathan. Right now. Who are you going to protect this time? He reached for me, but I stepped back. Brooke, wait. No more waiting. No more excuses. I held up Dad's unfinished letter. Whatever Helen's hiding, whatever she did, I'm going to find out. With or without you. You don't understand what she's capable of. Actually, I do. That's why I'm done playing her game. I turned to leave, then paused. You know what's funny? Dad's money was never about the gallery. It was about this moment. About finally seeing the truth. What truth? That sometimes the people we love are the ones who cage us. I met his eyes one last time. The question is, Nathan, are you the bird, or are you the cage? I walked away, leaving him by the pond where we first fell in love. My phone buzzed again, but I didn't check it. I already knew what I had to do next, and it started with finding out what Helen Parker was so desperate to hide. My mother's house was too quiet when I arrived. No lights in the windows, no movement behind the curtains. Just Helen's Mercedes parked in the driveway like a black warning. I found them in the kitchen. Mom sat at the table, hands wrapped around an untouched cup of tea. Helen stood by the window, perfectly composed in her designer suit. The torn pieces of Dad's letters lay scattered between them. Welcome home, dear. Helen's smile didn't reach her eyes. Your mother and I were just discussing old times. Mom's face was ash gray. Brooke, I'm so sorry. I should have told you years ago. Told me what? Helen moved to the counter, picking up a familiar envelope. My father's last letter. That your father was a thief. Don't. Mom's voice cracked. He stole from the firm, Helen continued. Nearly bankrupted us. Richard caught him doctoring the books, but instead of pressing charges, we made a deal. The room spun. I gripped the doorframe. You're lying. The money he left you? It was compensation. Hush money, really. Helen's voice dripped false sympathy. We kept quiet about his embezzlement, and he agreed to leave town. To protect your reputation, of course. My father would never. Show her, Mom whispered. Helen pulled documents from her briefcase. Bank statements. Security camera photos. Dad's signature on checks he shouldn't have been able to write. Why? I asked Mom. Why didn't you tell me? Because I asked her not to. Nathan's voice came from behind me. He looked wrecked, tie gone, shirt wrinkled. Mom threatened to expose everything if she spoke up. Helen's composure cracked slightly. Nathan, you don't understand. I understand perfectly. He moved past me, placing Richard's trust documents on the table. Just like I understand why you made Dad sign over the firm. Why you've been intercepting our mail. Why you forged Brooke's signature on the house deed. I was protecting our family. No. Nathan's voice was steel. You were protecting yourself. Because Dad wasn't the only one stealing from the firm, was he? The color drained from Helen's face. Richard found your offshore accounts, Nathan continued. The real reason you needed Brooke's inheritance, to cover the money you've been siphoning off for years. I laughed, a harsh sound that surprised even me. All this time, you've been calling my father a thief while stealing millions yourself? Everything I did was for this family. Helen's mask finally shattered. Your father threatened to expose me. He was going to ruin everything I built. So you ruined him first. The pieces clicked into place. That's what his last letter was about. He was trying to warn me about you. The money is yours, Helen said quickly. All of it. Just destroy those documents, and we can. We can what? I pulled out my phone, playing the recording from the firm. Helen's voice filled the kitchen. If you can't control your wife. I sent copies to the board 10 minutes ago, Nathan said quietly. It's over, Mom. Helen's face contorted. You ungrateful. Enough. Mom stood, her voice steady. Get out of my house, Helen. Before I call the police myself. This isn't finished. Helen gathered her briefcase with shaking hands. Nathan, think about what you're throwing away. I'm done throwing things away. He took my hand. Especially my marriage. After she left, the silence was deafening. Mom sank back into her chair, tears finally falling. I wanted to tell you, she whispered. Every day for 15 years. I looked at the scattered evidence of 2 decades of lies. My father's reputation destroyed. My marriage nearly ruined. All because of Helen's greed and manipulation. What do we do now? Nathan asked. I picked up Dad's torn letter, the warning he died trying to give me. The inheritance wasn't just money, it was his last attempt to expose the truth. To give me the weapon I needed to fight back. Now? I met Nathan's eyes. Now we finish what my father started. We bring her down, completely and publicly. It'll destroy the firm, he said. Maybe it needs to be destroyed. I touched the letter. Some things have to break before they can be rebuilt. Mom reached for my other hand. Whatever you decide, we face it together this time. No more secrets. No more secrets. But as I stood there between my mother and my husband, I wondered if we were ready for the truth that was still to come. The Parker mansion loomed before me, its windows dark except for Helen's study. My mother's words from an hour ago echoed in my head. Helen wasn't always like this. She lost everything once, before Richard. That's why she holds on so tight. I pressed the doorbell, Richard's final piece of evidence heavy in my pocket. The door opened to reveal Helen, composed as ever despite everything. I wondered when you'd come. She stepped aside. Richard called. He's turning himself in tomorrow. For covering up your embezzlement? For everything. She led me to her study, where papers and photos littered her usually immaculate desk. Would you like to know why your father really left that money? I know why. To expose you. No. She picked up an old photograph. To protect you from the truth about your mother and me. The photo showed two young women, arms linked, smiling. Mom and Helen, decades younger. My hands trembled as I took it. We were best friends once, Helen said. Until she married your father instead of Richard. The floor seemed to tilt. What? Evelyn was supposed to marry Richard. The merger between our family's firms depended on it. Helen's voice hardened. But she chose love over duty. The scandal nearly destroyed both companies. My father lost everything. So you married Richard instead. I saved both families. Rebuilt everything from scratch. She poured herself a drink. Your father knew. He threatened to tell you, to expose how I forced your mother's silence all these years. The money was his insurance policy. Clever man. She smiled bitterly. He knew I'd never let Nathan marry you if I'd known whose daughter you really were. The study door opened. Nathan stood there, face pale. Is it true? Nathan, Helen started. Answer me. His voice cracked. Did you know who Brooke was when we started dating? I did what I had to do. Helen's mask finally crumbled. Everything I've done was to protect what I built. What I suffered for. I pulled out my phone and the final document. Including killing my father? Helen froze. Richard found the proof. I placed his signed confession on her desk. You knew Dad was going to expose everything. So you made sure he never could. You can't prove anything. The police have Richard's statement. And this. I played a recording, Richard's voice confessing how Helen had tampered with Dad's heart medication. Helen lunged for the phone, but Nathan caught her arm. It's over, Mom. You ungrateful child. She twisted free. I gave you everything. You gave me a cage, Nathan said quietly. And called it love. Sirens wailed in the distance. Helen's face contorted. I won't let you destroy everything I built. She grabbed for her desk drawer. I saw the glint of metal before Nathan did. Helen, don't. The gunshot was deafening. Nathan staggered, clutching his shoulder. Helen stood frozen, the smoking gun trembling in her hand. My own son, she whispered. My own. I tackled her as the police burst in. The gun skittered across the floor, stopping at Richard's feet. He stood in the doorway, looking ancient. I'm sorry, he said to Helen as the officers handcuffed her. I should have stopped you years ago. Later, at the hospital, Mom held my hand while we waited for news about Nathan. I never wanted you to know, she said. About Helen, about Richard, any of it. Did you love him? Richard? Once. But not like I loved your father. She squeezed my hand. Some choices define us. Helen never understood that love isn't about control. The doctor emerged, Nathan would recover. But as I stood to go to him, Mom caught my arm. The question isn't whether you can forgive him, she said softly. It's whether you can build something new from all these broken pieces. I thought about Helen, about Nathan, about all the choices that had led us here. About Dad's last gift, not just money, but the truth that finally set us all free. Some things, I said, have to break before they can heal. The gallery opening bustled with life, my father's inheritance transformed into white walls and polished floors. Through the windows, I could see the last orange leaves clinging to the trees, refusing to let go. Your father would have loved this, Mom said, adjusting a painting, one of Dad's old landscapes we'd found in the attic. He always said you had an eye for beauty in broken things. I touched the frame, remembering the day I discovered his hidden art studio. Did you know he painted? He started after everything with Helen. Said it helped him make peace with the choices we'd made. The gallery door chimed. Nathan stood there, arms still in a sling, looking uncertain in civilian clothes instead of his usual suit. The physical therapist says 2 more weeks, he said, moving closer. The firm's sale goes through tomorrow. Richard told me. I straightened another frame. Are you sure about walking away from it? The firm died with Mom's confession. He studied Dad's painting. Besides, some legacies aren't worth preserving. Helen's trial had been quick, Richard's testimony devastating. She'd taken a plea deal, trading a lighter sentence for full confession of her financial crimes. The truth about Dad's death would haunt us all forever. I got a job offer, Nathan said quietly. Teaching business law at the community college. I smiled, remembering his long-ago dreams. And? I accepted. He touched his injured shoulder. Some wounds remind us who we really are. Or who we could be. The gallery filled with opening night guests. I moved through them, playing hostess, until I found myself in the back room, my private collection. Here hung the pieces that told our real story, Helen's old photograph with Mom, Dad's last letter framed beside his final painting. The trust documents that had started everything. Nathan followed me in. You turned our war into art. Not art. Truth. I touched the glass over Dad's letter. He knew what Helen was capable of, but he still tried to protect everyone, you, me, even Richard. His revenge wasn't the money. It was making sure the truth couldn't stay buried forever. Like mother, like daughter. Nathan's voice was soft. You could have destroyed Helen completely, exposed everything publicly. But you chose justice over revenge. Maybe they're the same thing sometimes. We stood in silence, surrounded by the evidence of our shared history. Finally, Nathan spoke. I miss you. I know. I met his eyes. But I don't miss who I was with you. And who was that? Someone afraid to fly because she might break the cage. I moved toward the door. The gallery opening starting. You should stay. He nodded, understanding what I wasn't saying. We could build something new, maybe. But not yet. Not until we'd both learned to live without cages. The main gallery hummed with conversation. Mom chatted with Richard by the window. They'd found their own kind of peace, decades of secrets finally laid to rest. My phone buzzed, a text from Helen's prison account, the painting of the broken bird. Is it yours? I looked at the piece she meant, hung prominently near the entrance. A bird breaking free of its cage, leaving golden feathers behind. No, I typed back. It's Dad's. His last one. Her response came quickly. He always did understand us better than we understood ourselves. I put the phone away, moving through my gallery, my freedom, bought with truth instead of silence. Tomorrow would bring new challenges, new choices. But tonight, surrounded by art born from broken things, I finally understood what Dad had tried to teach me. Sometimes revenge isn't about destroying your enemies. Sometimes it's about rebuilding yourself from the pieces they left behind. I opened the gallery doors wider, letting in the autumn air. Somewhere in the distance, birds were flying south, leaving their empty nests behind. It was time for all of us to learn how to fly again.